Ever wonder why you still don't feel like a real adult, no matter how old you get? Why that voice in your head keeps saying, I'm just pretending to have my life together? Why, even at 40, 50, 60, you feel like you're playing dress up in someone else's costume? You're not defective, not behind, and you're not failing at some essential life milestone. The concept of adulthood as we know it is completely artificial. And the reason you never feel like you've reached it is because there's nothing real to reach. Remember when you were a kid and adults told you, when you grow up, you can do whatever you want. You probably couldn't wait to get there. But here's what they didn't mention: the cage grows with you. It doesn't disappear, it just gets more sophisticated. And worse, you become your own jailer. First, let's talk about what society actually means when it says adult. It's not about wisdom, emotional maturity, or authentic growth. It's about three things. First, economic function. You work, pay taxes, service debt, consume products on schedule. You're a reliable economic unit that keeps the machine running. If you're not generating profit for the system, you're labeled irresponsible or not adulting properly. Second, social compliance. You follow rules without questioning them, suppress inconvenient emotions, and teach the next generation to do the same. You don't make waves, don't ask uncomfortable questions, and definitely don't act childish, which means don't be spontaneous, curious, or authentically alive. Third, role performance. You pretend to have everything figured out even when you don't. You wear the costume of competence, responsibility, and control because that's what the script demands, not because it's true. None of this has anything to do with actual development or becoming more yourself. It's about becoming less yourself, more predictable, more useful to a system that needs compliant participants. Kids find adults boring because most adults are boring, not because they've matured beyond fun, but because they've been systematically drained of spontaneity, curiosity, and authentic response. They've traded their living impulses for a socially approved avatar. Watch a proper adult interact with a child. See how mechanical it gets. The predictable responses, the emotional flatness, the way they seem to be reading from an invisible script. Kids pick up on that immediately. They're not impressed by your mortgage, your salary, or your investment portfolio. They can feel that something essential is missing. Here's the most fucked up part. The system convinces you that feeling not adult enough means you need to try harder. So you start upgrading your adult avatar. More responsibility, better emotional control, increased productivity, improved life skills. You're essentially grinding levels in an RPG, thinking that if you just get your responsibility stat to plus 10 and your emotional stability to max level, you'll finally feel like a real adult. But it never works because you're not becoming more yourself. You're becoming a better player of someone else's character. The more you adult, the further you drift from who you actually are. No wonder it feels fake. One of the cruelest parts of this system is what happens to dreams. Remember when you were a kid and wanted to be an astronaut, artist, explorer, inventor? The system teaches you those dreams are unrealistic, childish, impractical, or just stupid. They're not crushing your dreams because they're impossible. They're crushing them because following your genuine desires might lead you somewhere unpredictable, somewhere the system can't control. When I started actively searching for myself, I literally began by pursuing my childhood dreams. I moved to the tropics because I hated winter. Started writing songs because I always wanted to but was scared to do it. Bought a sailboat because freedom was always my biggest dream. Rented a house with fireplace because I always loved fire. Learned to design leather bags because I dreamed of being an inventor. I didn't understand the system back then, but I intuitively felt that I needed to dig somewhere in that direction. Now let's get to one of psychology's favorite tricks, the inner child concept. On the surface, it seems helpful. Reconnect with that authentic part of yourself that got buried under all the social conditioning. But here's the problem. Psychotherapy doesn't want to actually restore that authentic self to power. It wants to keep it as a separate entity that you visit occasionally for emotional support while your adult self continues running the system's program. This isn't integration, it's custody. You get to have supervised visits with your real self while your avatar handles real life. The split is maintained, the system stays in control, and you get to feel like you're working on yourself without actually changing anything fundamental. True restoration isn't about having conversations with different parts of yourself. It's about dismantling the entire artificial construction and returning to unified operation. Your real self is your capacity to respond from within, not from script. The part that experiences and chooses before social programming kicks in. Let's talk about emotional maturity. In the system's definition, mature emotions are controlled, predictable, and convenient. Adults don't cry, control your anger, be rational, act your age. But emotions are information signals. They're how your authentic self communicates about what's actually happening. When you systematically shut down emotional responsiveness in the name of maturity, you're essentially unplugging your internal guidance system. Real emotional regulation means the emotion gets heard and can influence your response. Emotional castration means that the emotion is dismissed by default, regardless of what it's telling you. No wonder adults are depressed, anxious, and feel disconnected from their lives. They've been trained to ignore their own signals in favor of social appropriateness. Adults are supposed to be constantly productive, always working toward something, achieving, improving, building. Rest and play become rewards you have to earn through sufficient labor. But this is backwards. Play, exploration, and genuine rest aren't frivolous activities you graduate away from. They're how living organisms naturally function. The obsession with constant productivity is just another way to keep you too busy to notice you're running someone else's program. So, why don't you ever feel like a real adult? Because there's no real adult to become. There's only the costume they handed you and told you to wear until it feels natural. Your authentic self, the one that existed before all this programming, can sense the artificiality. It knows this isn't you. It knows you're playing a character, not living your life. That persistent feeling of I'm still figuring it out or I don't feel like a grown up isn't immaturity. It's your real self refusing to fully identify with Avatar. Real development isn't about becoming a better adult. It's about dismantling the entire framework and returning to integrated operation. It's about following your actual interests, responding authentically to situations, and making decisions based on your genuine preferences rather than social scripts. It's about recognizing that the maturity they sold you was just another control mechanism, and that your resistance to it was healthy all along. You don't need to become more adult. You need to become more yourself. And your real self was never boring, never artificially controlled, never systematically productive. It was curious, spontaneous, emotionally honest, and completely alive. And before you panic that dismantling adulthood will collapse civilization, reliability and competence don't require suppressing what's alive in you. Choosing rules, reconsidering them, and having the right to exit are signs of a living system, not its breakdown. That version of you is still there under all the programming, and maybe it's time to let it drive.